11, this is your last contact. So this occurs 3 weeks after the week 8 visit. This is a study closeout interview. It's Form 121, which I don't have here because it's still in the draft phase. But basically on that form, there's a few questions about how have your hot flashes, how have you been doing with your hot flashes, if you've had any withdrawal symptoms since stopping the medication, things like that. It's a fairly short interview, but we may add some things to it. And then during that phone call, first you want to remind her to return her diaries by mail. It doesn't say on here, but of course enough. Thank her for her participation. There's reimbursement. I'm not sure, the reimbursement I think varies by site, whether you would reimburse her in phases for every visit or if you just reimburse her at the very end, but those are the things that you would talk about during this phone call. You'll be getting a check in the mail or whatever. So that's kind of the wrap up phone call. So that's
a question for you. When we do these kind of studies, we usually start with case report forms. That's like a checklist just to remind, pick up this, give this.
Mm-hmm.
We leave the visit with these items, the patient leaves the visit with these items. Do you want us to just do those for our own site, or?
Well, if you have the checklist, it's kind of built into this form. We have this form that's partially dated and then partially to kind of fill both functions. Okay. It has listed on it where you record information and there are shaded boxes of, and it's in sequential order, so at this point give her
so those are like in the shaded boxes?
Yeah, and so you don't have to enter that, but you can check, I need to double check, you can check along the way. We originally had one that at the very end it had a checklist, and then we thought we wanted at the very end to just as a double check, or do you wanted to check it off along the way in sequential order? And you probably make pros and cons each way. So we do have that on that form. We can certainly provide a separate checklist if you want one, or you can develop your own. But that's what our current plan is. It's kind of built into this study visit form. But you take a look at that when you see it, and if you think you need something more, like a separate checklist, we'd be glad to develop that for you. Or again, if it's something that works with your process. Your process might be slightly different, so you may want to come up with your own to help you double check.
And are you going to ask them to guess what they're on? If they'd like
that is on the week 8 form.
Oh, that is
on,
okay.
Yeah. I can't remember if it's a week 8 or week 11. But there are a few questions like that. Which group do you think you're in and why? Sort of questions.
Yeah.
Julie, what's the purpose of the second platform?
That's for the repository, and are we getting FSH in this regard?
No,
it's just for the repository.
Just the repository specimens for storage.
So for future studies.
So that will be called a study. Because it's only for future studies, used in future studies. Then if the person has declined to consent, on the consent form there's 2 places where you have to sign. So if she has declined for her specimens to be used for future studies, then would you do the second one? That would be my question.
That's a good question. Do you know, is that used at all for any comparison with baseline?
I don't know that I don't know how we want to handle that. Like, I don't know if we're going to require women to give us those specimens. I'm not sure.
There's, on the consent form that we designed, there's actually, I think we put like a checkbox. It's on the model consent form. Your consent forms may vary, but I think it's set up in a way that the woman, may consent to, participating in these other things, but may not want to provide DNA, for example.
Right. Yeah. So I'm not totally sure about whether that week 8 is repository only, or if any of that will be. Because if she said that no, not for the repository, I'm still not sure that you wouldn't collect that week 8. You wouldn't send it to the repository, but there may be things that are still used to compare baseline. I thought I heard it, but I'm not sure. So I think you can still collect it, but you wouldn't, if she said no repository, that would apply to the first blood specimen also. You would collect it, but it wouldn't be sent to the
Right, so
repository.
I've been discussing this with Ellen, but
Right.
the first draw is for safety labs. So
Right.
you would draw that and just do the safety.
Right.
Actually, the first
Yeah.
draw will be both for repository baseline samples and for the safety labs.
Right, but you wouldn't send it to
Correct.
repository if she said no.
Right,
Right.
Yeah.
right.
So in our consent form, which we're sending to the IRB on Friday, we have the two, just like, yeah, two separate consents. If you consent just for the study, and then you consent for for the repository, the DNA, blood, and urine. So if they said no,
Yeah.
then we would need to
So
know.
that's the question I'm gonna need to, you will need to know that, so there will have to be a way for it to tell you at that point. You kind of probably similar to this Form 110, they'll tell you don't prepare it for the repository, or don't collect it at all. But that's, I might need to check out with the steering committee whether it would still be collected for X, but not for the repository.
And the same would go for the
For the
urine.
first one, right, that's true. So that's something we'll need to add to that form. And it'd probably be that same form at the first visit that tells you whether you need to get the FSH or not. We'll need to add that says also don't bother to do the repository ones because she said no.